To me, my X-Men.
Welcome back to the channel, guys. So my first question for y'all is, have you caught up with X-Men 97 Season 2 so far? If not, spoiler alert, because we do get into parts of it from here forward. So, at the end of the first season, we saw Scott Summers and Jean Grey flung into the 40th century, along with Storm, Wolverine, and Morph. In the second season, we see them spending time with and training a young boy named Nathan, who is their own son, the future Cable, which he doesn't know at the beginning, in the war-torn future run by Mother Askani, who in the comics is Rachel, another of their children from a whole other timeline. Of course, if you've seen the last couple of episodes, you know they're back in the present now. But I just want you to sit with the situation for a second. Two parents stranded in the future raising one kid who doesn't know they're his parents, while a second kid they don't know is their daughter runs the place. What a damn mess. And it just sums up the Summers family tree, which is more or less a dynasty built out of kidnappings, clones, time travel, and alien empires. Let's dig in. Scott Summers, aka Cyclops, the center of the storm. Obviously, we have to start with Scott, and where we start is him falling out of the sky. As kids, Scott and his younger brother Alex were on a family plane ride with their parents, Christopher and Catherine Summers, when a Shi'ar vessel attacked the aircraft. With the plane burning, their mother strapped the boys into a single parachute and pushed them out, without a single care for herself. The landing gave Scott a serious head injury, and that injury is the single most defining fact of his life, because it defines his optic blasts. When they emerge, turns out they have no off switch, because the part of his brain that should have let him control them was damaged in the fall. That's why the visor and the ruby quartz glasses exist. Things didn't get better. After years in the foster system, he was put into an orphanage in Nebraska, one that, in a really tasty retcon, turns out to have been run by Mr. Sinister, who was cultivating Scott's genetics from childhood. He was groomed as breeding stock before he was old enough to know it. And he was also being used by the mutant criminal Jack Winters as an accomplice. Hell of a childhood, right? By the time Xavier found him, Scott was a boy who had learned that control was survival, and that letting go gets people killed. But things turned around with Xavier, and so it's Scott who became the first X-Man. He was the one who calls the plays in the field, and he's also the leader of the X-Men. And here's the thing to hold on to for the rest of the video. It's Scott that the whole family tree circles around. Every sibling, every child, every clone, and alternate timeline descendant either comes from him directly or exists because somebody made a decision about him. He is his family's survival instinct given a face and a visor. Christopher Summers, aka Corsair, the father who became a space pirate. You think Star-Lord was the only space pirate connected to Earth? Absolutely not, and that brings us to Scott's father. Major Christopher Summers was a US Air Force pilot flying that plane, and he didn't die. He was captured by the Shi'ar Empire and hauled off into space as a slave of the Mad Emperor Deken, the same tyrant who ordered the attack in the first place. Christopher escaped, gathered a crew of fellow escapees, and reinvented himself entirely as Corsair, the swashbuckling leader of the interstellar pirate band known as the Starjammers. For years, Christopher believed his sons had died in the crash, and for years, Scott believed he was an orphan. It's tragic irony at its best. When they finally meet, Scott doesn't even get a tearful reunion. His dad's basically a stranger in a pirate coat who abandoned Earth and made a whole new life, not knowing his boys were in care homes. For decades, their relationship has been famously prickly and unresolved, and you can't really blame him. But the funny thing here is how similar they are. Like, just look at what Christopher's response to catastrophe was. He refused to go quietly and then went off to build a crew and lead them, which is exactly what Scott does with the X-Men. Corsair is also the reason the Summers family keeps getting dragged into interstellar politics, as if timeline shenanigans aren't enough. Because of him, Cyclops is more than a mutant team leader. He also happens to be the heir to a galactic grudge. And Corsair's crew, Hepzibah, Chod, and Raza, are found family instead of being related by blood. But they're the closest thing to a stable household a Summers ever gets. Catherine Summers, the mother lost to the Shi'ar War. Catherine Ann Summers doesn't get much page time, but that's the point of her. She's the loss that shapes Scott, Christopher, and Alex, and then consequently the rest of the vast Summers family tree as well. We've mentioned the crash, but not the details of the aftermath. Namely that Catherine wasn't killed immediately. Instead, she was captured alongside her husband and taken before Deken, the emperor of the Shi'ar, and she was murdered by him, killed in front of Christopher, an act of blatant imperial cruelty. That's the last her family knows of her for a very long time. Except she was pregnant when she died. Anyone who's seen TV dramas knows just how big of a plot twist a baby could be. But this detail was actually held in reserve for over 20 years of real-world publishing, and only after that did it become one of the biggest bombshells this family ever produced. No spoilers yet, but we're getting there, I promise. So no, the Summers family doesn't begin with a proud legacy or grand ancestry. It begins with a selfless mother shoving her children out of a burning plane, and then dying in an alien throne room while her beloved husband watches. Everything after, the foster homes, the estrangement, the decades of near misses and failed reunions, comes from that one loss. Right on day one, this family became broken, and every single member since has been trying, and mostly failing, to put it back together. There's also one or two who are just trying to burn it all down, but, you know, same difference really.
Whatever.
Alex Summers, aka Havok, the brother who grows up in Scott's shadow. Alex went out of that plane in the same parachute as Scott, but then the system pulled them apart when he got adopted, but Scott didn't. They were brothers with the same trauma, but went on to have completely different childhoods. And by the time they found each other again, the gap between them had become a gulf. Alex's mutation is in the same family as his brother's, fittingly enough. He absorbs ambient cosmic radiation and releases it as plasma waves from his hands, and later takes the codename Havok. Also, the Fox X-Men reboot films lied to you. Alex is the younger brother. This has bothered me for years, frankly, and I just had to get that out there. There's bittersweet symmetry when it comes to their powers. And the comics love to use this. Their powers cancel each other out. Neither brother can hurt the other. They are, on a biological level, incapable of landing a punch. Which is ironic, given how much they hurt each other everywhere else. Siblings, am I right? Because Alex's entire existence is defined by comparison, and I don't just mean on this family tree. He's the reserve X-Man, the guy who joins up and drifts away. The one who never wanted the responsibility but keeps having it handed to him anyway. Why? Because he's Scott's brother. Like, he did things, okay? He led X-Factor, which was the government-sponsored mutant team. He had a long, messy, on-again, off-again relationship with Polaris that's outlasted most marriages in comics. He later led the Starjammers and even the Uncanny Avengers, which Captain America personally chose him for. But through all of it, no matter all he does, the label follows him. Cyclops' his brother. Alex is living proof that this family produces heroes and damage in equal measure. And sometimes that happens in one single person. He wants to get away from Scott's shadow, but the family keeps reeling him back in. Sometimes by force, sometimes by guilt, sometimes just by needing him. And he keeps going back. Gabriel Summers, aka Vulcan, the secret brother raised as a weapon. Yeah, so here's the bombshell, as promised. So yeah, Catherine was pregnant when D'Ken killed her, but the baby didn't die with her. Instead, the Shi'ar removed that unborn child and placed him in an artificial womb, where he was aged rapidly to adolescence and raised in captivity as a slave. He probably would have been better off dead in the womb considering all they put him through. His name is Gabriel Summers, and he's the third Summers brother. But don't worry, he's a surprise to most people, even comic fans. Sure, he was teased at by Sinister way back, but his first appearance wasn't until X-Men Deadly Genesis. The reveal was audacious. Gabriel had been, in fact, recruited into a secret, failed X-Men team sent to Krakoa before the famous giant-sized lineup. And then the team died, and Xavier wiped their existence from everyone's memory, including Scott's. So Scott lost a brother he never knew he had, twice, and Xavier chose not to tell him. Damn. This is why people call Professor X morally gray. But unlike all comic book characters who aren't Uncle Ben, Gabriel came back and took the identity of Vulcan. He became an Omega-level mutant with control over energy itself. And he understandably came back absolutely pissed. And what he does with that fury is the most operatic thing in the Summers family mythos. He goes to space, takes on the Shi'ar Empire, stole his life, and wins. He kills D'Ken, the murderer of his mother, ends up marrying D'Ken's sister Deathbury, before installing himself as Emperor of the Shi'ar. Bit of a drama queen, am I right? So yeah, you're right. This secret baby that no Summers knew about grew up to rule an interstellar empire. See, that's why the Summers line isn't just tragic, they're like a big dramatic opera too. Other families produce black sheep, but this one produces a galactic tyrant that's gotta be stopped by his own brother. Madelyne Pryor, the first wife, who became the Goblin Queen. And now we get to where Scott's personal life curdles into full-blown horror, and also basically becomes a telenova with superpowers. This is also where the next generation of the Summers family starts, by the way. So after Jean Grey's famous death at the end of the Dark Phoenix saga, a grieving Scott met a pilot named Madelyne Pryor, a woman who looked uncannily like the love he'd just buried. To no one's surprise, they fell in love and got married. They had a son, Nathan Christopher Charles Summers, born in Uncanny X-Men number 201. For a brief moment, Scott Summers had the one thing this family never gets: a simple life. But it turned out to be a lie built by Mr. Sinister. Because nothing good can be real in the Marvel Universe, and if it is real, it certainly won't last long. Madelyne was a clone of Jean, grown by Sinister and put in Scott's path for one purpose: to produce a child combining the Summers and Gray genetic lines. A weapon Sinister believed one day could kill Apocalypse. So yeah, Scott's whole marriage was a breeding program. Then Jean came back. Scott returned to her, and Madelyne, abandoned, told her existence was actually fake, her memories implanted and her love engineered, broke. And she broke hard. She made a deal with demons and rose as the Goblin Queen, culminating in the Inferno crossover, where she attempted to sacrifice her own infant son. And yeah, this is exactly where X-Men 97 got it from. Hardcore Jean fans or Scott Jean shippers might get mad, but Madelyne is impossible to skip. She's the point where the Summers family stops being just unlucky and their family drama and trauma start being specifically manufactured. Like, do you understand how much Sinister did just to get his hands on Scott's DNA? He designed a person, orchestrated a marriage, and then harvested a literal child. And that child soon becomes the most important figure in the whole Summers lineage. And we'll get to him in a bit, but not before we mention the real love of Scott's life. Jean Grey, the love that defines the family's future. Look, Jean isn't blood, but she's closer to her beloved Scott more than most of his actual relatives. And she belongs in this tree anyway because the entire second generation orbits her. She and Scott are the foundational X-Men romance. And I mean that literally because they were the two founding members first meeting in X-Men #1. And their relationship has survived possession, death, resurrection, clones, and an absurd number of love triangles. Multiple times. But what always gets me is something that people always get shocked by. In mainline continuity, Scott and Jean have never had a biological child together. Not one. Cable's mother is Madelyne, even though that basically means that he shares Jean's DNA. Every Scott and Jean child exists in an alternate reality or a possible future. Rachel's from a collapsed timeline, Nate Gray from a different universe entirely. There's some scattered across the multiverse too, like on Earth 1018, they have a son, Charles, and a daughter, Jeanette, after Jean and Scott have retired and settled down to raise a family. Which is, when you think about it, unbearably sad and completely on brand. The great love story at the heart of the X-Men produces children only in timelines that got destroyed, or worlds that aren't theirs. Their family's real everywhere except here, but that's also why Jean is so essential. She isn't necessarily a branch of the family tree, but she is the reason so many branches exist at all, even if they're from futures that failed or realities that got destroyed. She's the family's most important non-blood member, the love that keeps returning through death, time travel, and even comic book continuity itself. Rachel Summers, aka Mother Askani, the daughter from a future that didn't survive. Now we get into the next generation. So Rachel is Scott and Jean's daughter, and she's from a timeline where everything went wrong. She comes to us from the iconic Days of Future Past Future, a dystopia where mutants are hunted, herded into camps, and branded. Rachel was treated as a bloodhound in that world, psychically enslaved, tattooed, and used to track down her own kind. She managed to escape into the present, arriving in a world where her parents are alive and much younger than she remembers. Obviously, they have no idea who she is, and it's gotta be a gut punch, meeting your parents and having to introduce yourself. Also, she's a Phoenix host, inheriting that cosmic connection from Jean, and later takes the name Marvel Girl in her mother's honor. But her most important role for our purposes is what she becomes later. When she's thrown 2,000 years into the future, Rachel founds the clan Askani and becomes Mother Askani, the ancient hooded figure who orchestrates the rescue and raising of baby Nathan Summers, her own half-brother, or full brother depending on how you say it. Which brings us to the mind-bending thing X-Men 97 has been doing this season. Scott and Jean were stranded in the 40th century and living in a future next to their own daughter, training their own son. And they had no idea. Parents standing in a world built by a child they haven't had yet, raising a child they're about to lose. Rachel is simultaneously proof of Scott and Jean's legacy and a standing reminder that his family's future is always being rewritten by whatever war comes next, and never in a good way. Nathan Summers, aka Cable, the son sent to the future to survive. I kid you not, Cable has enough material to make a whole channel about. Born to Scott and Madelyne, baby Nathan was infected by Apocalypse with a techno-organic virus, a spreading metal corruption with no cure in the present day. Because the alternative was watching his infant son die in agony, Scott made the hardest decision of his life. He handed the baby over to a woman from a far future and let her carry him 2,000 years away, knowing he would never see him grow up. His decision paid off because Nathan survived. He grew up in the clan Askani as the Askani son, fighting a lifelong war against Apocalypse, holding the virus at bay with constant telekinetic effort, which is why so much of his enormous psychic power is occupied just keeping himself alive. When he came back to the present, it was as Cable, grizzled, huge, all guns, and older than his own father. That's gotta be painful in a whole different way. Scott gave up a baby to save him and got back a middle-aged soldier who already lived a hard life without him. Their reconciliation on the eve of Scott's wedding to Jean is one of the best moments in X-Men comics. And this is exactly what X-Men 97 showed. Scott and Jean training young Nathan in the future, knowing what he becomes and what they're about to lose. Cable is this family's bridge between past trauma and future survival. Stryfe, the clone raised as Apocalypse's weapon. Baby Nathan's story didn't just end with being sent into the future. When he was taken there, the Askani made a clone, a backup in case the original didn't survive the virus. You know, as one does. That clone ended up being stolen by Apocalypse's forces and raised as a weapon and a vessel, groomed to eventually house Apocalypse's own consciousness. He grew up as Stryfe. His story is the perfect inverse of Cable. Nathan was sent away to be saved, but Stryfe was created to be used. Same face, same genetics, same blood. But while one was raised by a religious order to be a savior, the other was raised by a tyrant to be a sacrificial tool. For years, both of them believed that he was the clone and the other was the original. Apocalypse himself got it wrong and then discarded Stryfe in disgust upon learning the truth. Even the villain rejected him for being a copy. That's gotta hurt. Obviously, Stryfe isn't the son in a biological sense, but he's definitely part of the tree because he's built from Nathan's bloodline. And yeah, it also happens to be one of their deadliest enemies. Happens in all families, right? Hope Summers, the adoptive granddaughter who reignited mutant kind. Not every branch here is blood related, and Hope is the best example of that. She was born after M-Day. Yeah, when the Scarlet Witch infamously stripped nearly every mutant on Earth of their powers, and mutant births simply stopped. All with 3 words: no more mutants. And yeah, she becomes central to the mutant resurrection itself. Hope was the first mutant born afterwards, which made her a messiah to some, and to others, a target worth exterminating a whole town for. Most of Messiah Complex is trying to figure out who has her, the X-Men or the Marauders, but it turns out it's Cable who grabbed her and ran. He spent years hauling that baby up and down the timeline, staying one step ahead of everyone hunting her, raising her in war zones and refugee camps. He is her father in every way that counts, which makes Hope Scott Summers' granddaughter. Sure, they don't share DNA, but that doesn't matter. She's raised by his son, shaped by his family's habits, and eventually becomes central to the mutant resurrection itself. Nate Gray, aka X-Man, the alternate reality clone son. Nate Gray isn't from Earth 616, but from Earth 295, also known as the Earth where the Age of Apocalypse plays out entirely. In that ruined alternate timeline, Apocalypse conquered America and Mr. Sinister does what he always does. Except in that world, Scott and Jean never got together. So Sinister skipped the marriage story and just engineered a child from their harvested DNA in a lab. No parents, no childhood, no name, just a genetically perfect weapon grown to order. Nate escaped, took on the name X-Man, and turned out to be one of the most powerful psychics in Marvel. A raw Omega-level telekinetic and telepath. In fact, he was built so strong that he couldn't last and was burning through his own body. He eventually crossed into the main universe where he had to meet Scott and Jean, versions of his parents who had never conceived him and didn't know him at all, much like Rachel's story. But we contrast him with Cable here, not Rachel. Cable is Scott's real son, sent to the future to survive, raised by a religious order who did love him. Even Jean considers him her son, even though it was her clone who birthed him. Nate, on the other hand, is Scott and Jean's genetics, stripped of everything human and grown in a tank as a weapon. 2 sons of the same bloodline. One shaped by a family, one denied one entirely. They're clear mirrors. Adam X, the half-brother made by Shi'ar genetics. If you think your family has unresolved issues, just wait till you hear about Adam X. Back in the 90s, Mr. Sinister let slip a line to Cyclops about protecting him and his brothers, plural, and the fandom lost its damn mind trying to work out who the mysterious sibling was if it wasn't a misprint. Writer Fabian Nicozea had a plan. A half-alien mutant called Adam X the Extreme, a Shi'ar-blooded warrior who ignites the flammable elements in people's blood. Then, when Nicozea left the X office in 1995, the plot was abandoned, and a decade later, Brubaker gave the third Summers brother title to Vulcan instead. But the idea didn't die, because Nicozea came back and finished it. In X-Men Legends, Adam X is revealed as a Shi'ar eugenics experiment, built from genetic material taken from Catherine Summers before her death, and combined with Dickens. So, he's a half-brother by engineering rather than birth, which neatly lets both him and Vulcan exist without contradicting each other. Adam X shows just how far the cosmic meddling around in this family goes. And can we just let Catherine rest in peace? Tyler Dayspring, the grandson who became Genesis. And we end with the generation after Cable because of course the cycle repeats. In the far future, Cable and his partner Alia, who took the clan name Jen Scott, a tribute to Jen and Scott, raised a boy named Tyler Dayspring among the clan chosen. So I'll be honest here, I have no clue whether Tyler is Cable's biological son or adopted. No one does, and it's been muddied over the years, with long-running rumors pointing to him being Stryfe's kid. Though a family tree printed in X-Men Legends #2 lists him as Cable's son. Who even knows? Point is, Cable and Alia raised him, but it didn't turn out well. Tyler was captured and psychologically broken by Stryfe, turned against his own father. Cable was eventually forced to shoot him to save a hostage. Tyler survived and never forgave him, later traveling back to the present as the shadowy arms dealer Tolliver. He funded Chaos, got Deadpool to hunt down Cable, and then, after Apocalypse's apparent death, crowned himself Genesis, heir to Apocalypse's throne. He died trying to force adamantium back into Wolverine's skeleton, which went about as well as you'd expect. Yeah, this makes yet another Summers child who inherited a war before he inherited anything else. A few loose branches. With a family tree this messed up, I have to clear up some stuff before we close. So Mr. Sinister isn't family, but he's this family's uninvited architect. He ran Scott's orphanage, built Madelyne, created Nate Gray, and has been farming this bloodline for over a century. He deserves a mention just because of how much of a villainous busybody he is. As for Corsair Starjammers, they are a found family, not relatives. Also, yeah, I know, I haven't even mentioned the whole Emma Frost thing yet, because of course, Scott's other love had children with him, but again, only in futures that aren't this one. There's Ruby Summers from Bishop's dystopian Earth 1191, who inherited Scott's optic blast and a version of Emma's diamond skin turned ruby red, keeping herself in that near-immortal crystalline form to avoid aging. And then, on Earth 41001, Scott and Emma are married with a whole brood, the eldest being Megan Frost Summers, a young telepath still growing into her mother's second gifts, with several more Frost Summer siblings rounding out that household. Jeez, do Scott and Emma ever leave the bedroom? Then it gets weird and convoluted. Even more so. Take Earth 1298, the Mutant X universe, where Scott was taken by the Shi'ar as a boy and never became Cyclops. So his brother Alex ends up at the center of the bloodline instead. There, Havok has a son, Scott Charles Scotty Summers, with that world's Madelyne Pryor of all people, and Scotty can wield raw psionic energy from the astral plane. And Sinister, denied a Scott and Jean child in this world, ended up making one from Alex and Jean's DNA instead. A girl named Raven LeBeau, considered by Cerebro as potentially the most powerful mutant on the planet, who was adopted and raised by Gambit and his wife, Belladonna. Even in a world where Cyclops barely exists, Sinister still goes after his genes. And the Summers family reaches even the Fantastic Four, aka Marvel's first family, and here it's Rachel's line. In one Days of Future Past variant, Rachel marries Franklin Richards, Reed and Sue's reality-warping son, and they have a boy, Jonathan Reed Richards, who grows up to be the most powerful Omega-level mutant ever, and ends up conquering his entire universe as the tyrant Hyperstorm. Rachel and Franklin also have another son in a different timeline known as David Richards, who's in fact a variant of Hyperstorm himself. Tyrants all around, which means Scott Summers is, in at least one corner of the multiverse, the ancestor of a galactic despot who went 10 rounds with Galactus. Honestly, that's probably just an average day for Scott's genes. Even if you take the space pirates, the clones, and the time travel, the Summers family comes down to one stubborn thing. They get broken apart by war, secrets, and terrible decisions, but somehow claw their way back to each other anyway. Scott didn't inherit tradition or power. He inherited a dynasty of trauma, leadership, and impossible children. And every single new branch asks the same question. Can this family survive what the universe keeps doing to it? The answer is usually, for better or worse, yes. Let me know your favorite Summers in the comments. Smash that like and subscribe buttons, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a great day, and as always, stay marvelous.